I want to begin tonight with a question. Not a question to be answered quickly and set aside, but one to be carried, the kind that, once it truly lands, rearranges the furniture of everything you thought you knew about yourself. Here it is. When you are not paying attention to anything at all, what is your mind doing? Sit with that. Take your time. Think of the forgotten hours, the hours no one ever asks you to account for, and that you have never thought to account for yourself. Walk from one room to another. The red light at the intersection where your hand rests on the wheel, and your eyes are open, but seeing nothing in particular. The shower, the queue, the coffee going cold on your desk, the long middle distance you stare into while someone else speaks, and you hear the sounds of their words without absorbing the meaning. Lying in bed before sleep claims you, when the room is dark and the day is technically over, but your mind is still moving in every one of those moments. You're not solving a problem. You are not engaged with a task. You're not consciously directing your thoughts in any particular direction. You're simply here, drifting, unguarded, suspended in what we call the in-between. And the assumption so universal, that almost no one has ever thought to question it, is that in those moments, the mind rests, that it goes quiet, it idles dimly, waiting for the next instruction from the outer world. That assumption, I am here to tell you tonight, is the single most consequential mistake a human being can make about the nature of their own inner life. It is the mistake that explains why people want change and do not get it, why people set intentions and watch them evaporate, why people understand intellectually that their inner world shapes their outer world and still wake up after year in the same conditions they have always woken up in. Because the mind does not rest in those unguarded moments. The mind in those moments is not quieter than during your most focused hours. It is louder. It is more active, more generative, more relentlessly and intimately productive than at any other point in your waking life. And what it is producing silently, automatically, beneath every unfocused breath you have drawn, for as long as you have been alive, is the very substance from which your outer life is being continuously built. Modern neuroscience has given this a name. They call it the default mode network, a specific, measurable, mappable system of brain regions that lights up the instant external focus relaxes, hums with continuous activity in every resting moment, and that does not, under any circumstances, truly switch off. Scientists who first observed it were not merely surprised, but confounded. They had built their entire experimental framework on the assumption that a brain not actively processing a task would show reduced activity. They put people in scanners and waited, and the moment each subject stopped, focusing on the assigned task, a different set of regions blazed to life vividly. Consistently, in every person tested, across every culture, every age, every background. The whole hidden architecture that had been invisible because no one had thought to look for it in the unguarded moments. They named it the default, the thing the brain returns to automatically, the thing it does when it is not doing anything else. Not a failure mode, not a malfunction. The brain's most fundamental, persistent, and deeply characteristic activity. The thing that is, in a very real sense, more you than almost anything else your nervous system produces. And what does this network do? I want you to listen carefully here, because this is where the evening earns its keep. The default mode network is the seat of your inner narrative. It is the part of your mind that generates the voice in your head, that ceaseless, fluent, intimate monologue that has been running since you were old enough to have language. It imagines your future. It rehearses your past. It constructs word by word, image by image, moment by moment, your entire running sense of who you are, what you are like, what is possible for someone like you, what you deserve and what you do not, what the world reliably gives to people like you and what it withholds. It is the author of your self-concept, is the loom, as I have always said, on which your inner conversation is woven without ceasing, and it is running in every moment that your attention wanders from the outer world. Think of what that means across the span of a single ordinary day. You wake, and before you have spoken a word, or looked at a screen, or decided anything at all, it is already running. While you brush your teeth, it is running. While the kettle boils, it is running. While you drive, while you eat, while you wait, while you scroll without reading, while you stand in the lift staring at the floor, numbers it is running. And in the long surrendered minutes before sleep, the body has gone still, and the room is dark, and there is nothing left to do, it is running most freely of all, generating thoughts, generating images, generating the identity and the expectations and the predictions that will quietly shape everything that follows. And you have been mistaking that broadcast for yourself. The voice in your head, the one narrating your day, rehearsing your worries, revisiting your grievances, predicting what tomorrow will bring, based entirely on what yesterday brought you, have assumed that voice is you, not a voice you hear, but the very fact of your inner existence. Those thoughts feel like your thoughts, chosen by you, endorsed by you, true in the way that only your most intimate self-knowledge can be true. Here is what I have always known, and what science now maps in laboratories with electrodes and imaging machines. That voice is not your authentic self speaking. The voice is a pattern, a habit of mind, a groove carved by years of repetition, by inheritance, by the unconscious accumulation of everything you were told about yourself and your world before you were old enough to examine any of it. It's generating its output, not because you have deliberated and chosen it, but because it has been trained, and left to itself, it will run what it was trained to run. Every unguarded moment, for the rest of your life, entirely without your conscious consent or participation. You see how strange this is. You've been listening your whole life to a program you did not write, running on hardware you were handed before you understood what hardware was, and calling its output the truth about your life. The program is not neutral. It is not a blank channel waiting for you to fill it. By the time most people reach adulthood, the default mode network has accumulated thousands of hours of a very particular kind of content. The predictions of people who were themselves limited by their own defaults. The stories of a culture that mistakes its habits for facts. The conclusions a child drew in moments of pain and never thought to revisit. The self-definitions that arrived so early and so consistently that they sank beneath the level of belief into the bedrock of assumption. Network doesn't hold these things as opinions. It holds them as axioms, as the given coordinates from which it calculates everything else. The network does not tell you. It is doing this. It simply speaks. And the speaking feels like thinking. Now I want to show you what I have been teaching for my entire life. What I want you to see tonight with a clarity that I hope will not leave you. I have always said that the inner conversation is the loom on which outer conditions are woven. I have said that imagination is not a tool for dreaming, but the very substance of reality, that what you assume to be true about yourself, held in feeling and repeated in the unguarded chambers of your inner life, becomes your experience with a faithfulness that nothing in the outer world can override or contradict. I've said that God, which is to say consciousness itself, the I am that you are, is the only creator, and that what the I am assumes, the I am becomes, without exception and without delay, whether the assumption was made consciously or not. This is not poetry. This is not metaphor dressed up in the language of mysticism. This is the precise mechanical description of how a mind that runs a default network produces a life. Law of assumption and the default mode network are not two different things wearing similar clothing. They are the same thing, observed from opposite directions, one from within, by a man who spent his life attending to the nature of consciousness, one from without by scientists who had no spiritual framework at all and stumbled into the same discovery by accident. Let me state the mechanism as plainly as I am able. Whatever you assume to be true about yourself is held and continuously reinforced by your default mode network every time it runs. And because that network runs constantly in every unfocused moment, every gap in your outer attention, every forgotten interval between one task and the next, the reinforcement never pauses. Your assumptions are not being occasionally reviewed, they're being deepened, moment by moment, hour by hour, in the dark and in the in-between, by the most active part of your own mind. Now, here is the second half of the mechanism, which is equally important. The default mode network does not merely store your assumptions in some passive archive. It uses them, the brain. Modern neuroscience has now established, beyond serious dispute, is not a camera that records reality. It is a prediction machine. It does not encounter the world and then form beliefs about it. It forms beliefs first, and then uses those beliefs to construct its perception of the world. Before your eyes open in the morning, the brain is already generating a model of what the day will be, what to expect, what to notice, what is and is not relevant, what is and is not possible. The default mode network is the primary site at which that model is built, maintained, and updated. So, when I say that your assumptions become your experience, here is what is actually happening at the level of mechanism. Your assumptions are being held by the network. The network uses those assumptions to build the predictive model through which your brain interprets every moment of your day. The predictive model determines what you perceive and what you filter out, what opportunities you notice and what you walk past, what evidence you take as confirmation and what you dismiss. The behavior flows from what you perceive. Your choices flow from your behavior. The events of your life flow from your choices, and the conditions of your life flow from those events. It's not magic, it is machinery. Machinery runs on the fuel of your habitual inner state, the thing your default mode network is quietly generating. In every moment, you are not paying attention. The spiritual teaching and the neuroscience are pointing from opposite shores at the same water. And the water is you, your habitual assumption, the thing your mind does when it believes. No one, including yourself, is watching. I want to dwell here for a moment on a question I suspect many of you are carrying, without quite knowing you are carrying it. If the inner conversation has been shaping my life all along, why doesn't it feel that way? If my assumptions have been producing my conditions, why does my life feel like something that happens to me rather than something that comes from me? The answer is this: because the producing happens in the dark. It happens in the moments you have been discarding as empty. It happens in the spaces between tasks, the transitions, the unguarded intervals that feel like nothing, like waiting, like dead time between the real moments of your life. You have been looking for the cause of your conditions in the dramatic events, the decisions, the conversations, the visible turning points. The real cause is more continuous and more quiet than that. It is being manufactured steadily in the minutes that add up to the majority of your conscious life, a part of your mind that you have never thought to observe. This is also why wanting ordinary, conscious, effortful, wanting almost never changes anything. I've watched people want for decades. That have watched people want with great sincerity and great intensity. Want until the wanting itself becomes its own form of suffering. The want in ways that are completely genuine and completely fruitless. And the reason is not that wanting is insincere. The reason is that wanting, an inner state, is the inner state of someone who does not have. And the default mode network is not interpreting the content of your desire, the thing you want, the picture you have assembled of the life you are reaching for. The network is registering the state from which the wanting is being generated, and the state is lack. The state is the state of the person who is still outside the door, pressing their face to the glass, describing what they see on the other side. That state, the state of wanting, of seeking, of straining towards something not yet had, is what the network absorbs and deepens and runs in every unguarded moment. In your life, faithful as any mirror, continues to reflect back to you the conditions of someone who is wanting. Not because the universe is withholding, because you have been broadcasting the frequency of absence, and the world has been replying in kind. The shift that actually changes things is not from wanting to wanting harder, it is from wanting to having, from the state of the seeker to the state of the one who has already arrived. This is what I mean by living in the end, not imagining a future event. Being now in the inner state of the person for whom that event is already the ordinary fact of their life. And this shift cannot be manufactured by willpower, forced by discipline, or achieved by more determined effort. It can only be allowed, settled into, inhabited, quietly and repeatedly. The small, unguarded moments where the network is most impressionable and most ready to be retrained. Now, why is the autopilot so extraordinarily difficult to escape? Why does the old program run so persistently, even in people who understand intellectually exactly what it is doing? The default mode network is, its nature, a pattern network. It runs habitual loops. It generates the same kinds of thoughts in the same kinds of circumstances. It has been generating for years because those loops have been deepened by repetition into something that feels less like a choice and more like the texture of reality itself. The most well-worn thoughts are not experienced as thoughts. They are experienced as facts. They do not arrive labeled as opinions or tendencies or habits. They arrive with the full weight of the self behind them, because the self was built from them. And there is something else. The network is built explicitly, by design, at the level of its evolutionary function to maintain the continuity of your identity. This is not a flaw. It is the network doing precisely what it was constructed to do, keeping your sense of who you are consistent across time, so that you do not wake each morning as a stranger to yourself, that the relationships and responsibilities and history of your life retain their coherence. Continuity of self is not a bug. It is the network's primary product. The continuity of self is also the enemy of becoming someone new, because the network does not distinguish between a self-concept that is serving you and one that is costing you everything. It simply maintains what has been established. It protects the consistency of the existing identity with the same vigor, whether that identity is one of abundance or scarcity, a confidence or fear, possibility or limitation. Change the outer circumstances while the inner identity remains. The network will quietly work to restore the familiar conditions, not through any malice, but through the same faithful momentum by which a gyroscope corrects for disturbance and returns to its axis. This is why people who come into sudden money so often lose it. This is why people who achieve the goal so often find it hollow, or find ways to undermine it, or simply find themselves back in the old familiar territory within a few years. The outer conditions changed. The inner network did not, and the network, given time, brought the outer conditions back into alignment with itself. The only change that lasts is the change made at the level of the network, at the level of the default identity. the level of what the mind assumes in the quiet and the unguarded and the in-between. So, how do you change it? Let me be precise, because this is not a matter of philosophy or inspiration. This is a practice. It has steps, and the steps, followed consistently, work not by miracle, but by the same mechanism that installed the old programming. Now turn deliberately toward a new end. The default mode network is not fixed. It is plastic, in the technical sense, capable of being reshaped by experience. The paths it walks most often become the paths it walks most easily. New paths walked repeatedly deepen. Old paths no longer walked fade. The brain will faithfully reinforce whatever it is given. It does not evaluate or resist. It simply deepens what is repeated. And this means that the same mechanism that trained the old default into existence can be used with equal faithfulness to train a new one. The first step is awareness. And I mean something very particular by this. I do not mean analysis. I do not mean sitting down to examine your beliefs with a journal and a theory. I mean the live, present, in the moment. Noticing of what the network is saying in the small intervals of your day. The kettle is boiling, the red light is red. In the queue, you're in the shower. What is the voice saying? What images is it generating? What predictions is it making about today, about tomorrow, about the kind of life you can expect? You cannot retrain a program you cannot perceive. Most people live their entire lives inside the network's output, without ever once perceiving it as output, without ever once stepping back far enough to see it as a broadcast, rather than a fact. The first act of freedom is simply seeing what is being said, not questioning it yet, not fighting it, seeing it from the moment you can observe the network's activity. You are, in some small but real way, no longer entirely subject to it. The second step is recognition, the mapping of your particular loops. Because the network does not generate random content, it generates patterned content. The same worry that returns every morning, the same story about why a certain kind of love has always eluded you, the same prediction about money, about health, about belonging, about whether people like you can expect what other people seem to receive as a matter of course. These loops are specific, they are yours. And when you can name them not in order to attack them, but simply in order to know them, they lose something of their authority. Loop you can name is a loop you are no longer entirely inside. You are now on the outside of it looking in, and from the outside for the first time. You can choose. The third step is revision, and here I want you to hear something I have been saying my whole life with new ears. I have always taught that you can revise the past, events you have already experienced, events that feel hardened and finished and beyond the reach of any imagination, and be reimagined, felt differently in the inner life, and that this reimagining changes what those events mean to the network, and therefore changes what the network generates going forward. The past that the network runs on is not the objective record of what happened. It is the felt record, the version that was absorbed at the level of your inner state when the events occurred. The felt record can be changed by revisiting those events in imagination and feeling them differently, not pretending they did not happen, inhabiting them from a different inner posture, seeing in them what your state at the time prevented you from seeing. Network does not know the difference between a memory revisited and a memory revised. It only knows what it is running, and what it is given to run is what it will deepen. The fourth step is the deliberate feeding of new material in the unguarded moments, what I have always called living in the end, now understood as a practice of neurological retraining. Wherever you find yourself in a moment the network would otherwise claim for its old loops, the kettle, the queue, the car, the corridor. Give it something new. not a visualization performed with effort and strain, not an affirmation repeated without feeling. The inner state itself, the quiet, settled, embodied reality of the version of you for whom what you want is already ordinary, not the version who is hoping for it, or striving toward it, or trying to believe in it, the version for whom it has already arrived, and whose inner life carries the texture of that arrival, the ease of it, the naturalness of it, the way the body rests when it is no longer reaching. Even 30 seconds of this, genuinely inhabited rather than intellectually performed, is not nothing. It is a new path walked in the forest. It is the network being given new material to run, and each time you return to it briefly, jolly without drama, the path becomes slightly more distinct. The network begins to know it as a route. The fifth step is frequency. This is where the teaching differs most sharply from what most people attempt.